In the quiet of winter, a little girl huddles in the snow, clutching her baby brother close. Her trembling voice pierces the silence. "It's our fault, Mom. We'll be good. We promise." The moment a stranger kneels beside her and discovers the truth brings him to tears. Snow clung to every surface like a memory that refused to melt. It draped the wrought iron gates of the Morgan estate, glazed the stone pathways, and softened the sharp lines of wealth that defined Caleb Morgan's world. Everything was quiet, too quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Caleb tugged the zipper of his thermal coat higher, one gloved hand wrapped around the leash of his golden retriever, Scout. The big dog padded ahead through the powder, tail sweeping gently behind him. The sky was barely awake, a dull pewter gray, with light just beginning to bruise the horizon. Another day, another silence. Another perfect morning in a museum I live in, Caleb thought as his boots crunched across the snow-packed sidewalk. This house has everything, except a reason to matter. He lived in a cathedral of achievement. A mansion with glass walls, climate-controlled wine cellars, a piano no one played, and more smart appliances than living conversation. He had built his empire in fertility biotech from scratch, helping thousands of families conceive. Yet he returned each night to a house that never echoed with a child's laughter or a voice calling Dad, and never would. Scout stopped suddenly at the edge of the park, ears twitching. He let out a low, uncertain whine. "What is it, boy?" Caleb murmured, stepping forward. Scout tugged hard on the leash, pulling toward the run-down picnic shelter that sat half-swallowed in a snowbank beneath an old oak. The roof sagged with frost, and the bench beneath it was barely visible. That's when he saw it. Two small forms huddled together in the shadows, a slumped bundle of fabric and motionless limbs. He moved fast, the kind of movement that came not from adrenaline but instinct, deep, urgent, and unshakable. Scout bounded ahead. As Caleb drew closer, the shapes took form. A girl, maybe 7, curled around a baby in a threadbare pink blanket. Her arms encased the bundle protectively. Her head was bowed, forehead resting against the baby's, breath so shallow it fogged the air only slightly. And then, the whisper. "It's our fault, Mom. I'll be good, I promise." The words hit him like a gut punch. His chest tightened. The air turned to glass in his throat. He dropped to his knees so hard it sent a dull shock through his bones. The girl didn't even flinch. She kept whispering to the baby. Caleb leaned in, his coat brushing against her as he reached out. The moment his fingers touched the infant's skin, he recoiled slightly. It was ice cold. His wool sleeve soaked through instantly with freezing dampness. The baby stirred, a faint whimper escaping his lips, but no real cry. Caleb's heart beat wildly. Hey there," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl slowly lifted her face. Her cheeks were raw from the wind, lips chapped, and her eyes, gray-blue and wide, were both exhausted and resolute. She blinked at him. "Are you the man from the picture?" Caleb stared at her. "What?" She reached slowly into the front pocket of her hoodie, no coat, just a soaked, too thin hoodie, and pulled out a wrinkled photograph. Her hands shook as she held it out to him. He took it carefully, still holding the baby close with his other arm. Scout sat beside him now, ears back, tail still, watching. The photo was water-damaged and curled at the edges, but the image was unmistakable. A woman, young, long, dark hair, kind eyes, stood in front of a brick clinic. She was holding a baby in her arms, smiling faintly. and beside her, Caleb's breath caught. It was him. The image was from a press event nearly 8 years ago at one of his early donation-supported clinics. He was younger then, clean-shaven, idealistic. He hadn't seen that version of himself in years. His mind reeled. "Where's your mom?" he asked, his voice quieter now. The girl's lips quivered, and for the first time her composure slipped. She went to sleep a few days ago. She didn't wake up." He swallowed the rising nausea. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maddie?" He looked down at the baby in his arms. "And him?" "Benji. He's 10 months." Benji's head lolled against Caleb's shoulder. His skin was pale beneath the flush of cold. Okay, Maddie. We're getting you out of here." He slipped out of his coat and wrapped it tightly around both children, pulling them in close to his chest. Maddie didn't resist. Her body sagged against his as if her fight had finally worn out. Caleb stood, legs straining under the awkward weight. Scout walked close to his side, staying near Maddie as she clung to Caleb's shoulder. The wind howled harder now, as if chasing them. Snow whipped around their faces, erasing footprints as soon as they were made. Caleb pressed forward, each step burning through his calves. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. His mind spun with questions, disbelief, dread. But more than anything, it screamed one thing: get them warm. Get them safe. Then figure out the rest. The mansion's towering silhouette appeared like a mirage through the storm. He reached the back door, punched in the code with frozen fingers, and shoved it open with his shoulder. Heat met them like a wave. Scout ran inside and circled back to Caleb as he staggered into the living room, dropping to his knees in front of the fireplace. Caleb laid the baby on a thick throw blanket and wrapped him tighter in the coat. Maddie slumped beside him. He moved on instinct, grabbing firewood, tossing it into the hearth, flipping the switch on the gas starter. Flames jumped to life. Caleb turned on the thermostat, cranked it. He grabbed towels from the guest bathroom, started warming them in the dryer. Maddie sat silently on the rug, one hand on Benji's tiny chest, watching it rise and fall. Maddie looked up at him again. This time she didn't ask anything. She didn't flinch. She just reached out with small fingers and placed the photo in his lap again. Caleb stared at it, his own face, a moment in time he'd forgotten. And then the quiet voice beside him said again, almost like a lullaby. The words made his jaw tighten. He looked at the photo again, and for the first time in a long, long while, Caleb Morgan had no idea who he was anymore. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm, flickering light across the room's glossy hardwood floors and glass-paneled walls. It illuminated the sterile, curated perfection of Caleb Morgan's life. Black leather, cold marble, polished chrome. Everything expensive, everything untouched. And in the center of it all, wrapped in his designer coat, lay 2 shivering children who had no business surviving the night. Caleb crouched nearby, clutching the edge of the coffee table to steady his hands. He'd laid Benji on a thick towel beside the fire, replacing the soaked pink blanket with one of his own from the linen closet. The baby's tiny body radiated cold. His cheeks were blotchy. His breath still came in shallow, whistling pulls, like air passing through torn leaves. Caleb had turned the heat up to 78 degrees, lit every fireplace in the house, and placed a kettle on the stove, even though he didn't know what he was boiling water for. Scout lay close to Maddie, his golden fur pressed lightly against her leg, providing a warmth no radiator could match. She hadn't moved since they came in, just sat there cross-legged on the floor, arms around her knees, eyes locked on her baby brother. I have to warm bottles, Caleb muttered to himself, pacing. Formula. I need... Where the hell do I get formula? He pulled open the refrigerator. Artisan cheese, cold brew, imported yogurt, not a drop of milk. The pantry held quinoa, protein bars, and wine crackers. Not one item a child could eat. He slammed the door shut harder than he meant to. Maddie flinched just slightly. He froze, then exhaled slowly and crouched down beside her again. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to scare you." She didn't respond. He moved back to the kitchen and pulled out 2 mugs, filled them with warm water, and added a drop of honey to one. When he returned to the living room and handed it to her, she didn't reach for it, until Scout sniffed it. Caleb dipped a spoon into the mug and offered Scout a taste. The dog licked it once and looked completely unimpressed. Only then did Maddie take the mug into her trembling hands and sip. It was a start. Caleb eased himself down onto the floor beside her. Benji gave a faint cry, but it didn't last. Caleb checked his skin again, warmer now, pink returning to his cheeks, but still weak, too weak. And then finally, Maddie spoke. She said if we got lost, to find the man who helps people have babies, even if he doesn't have his own. Caleb turned to her slowly. "Your mom said that?" She nodded. "And the man she meant was me? She showed me your picture." Caleb swallowed. "The one you had in your hoodie? She kept it folded in her wallet. She said you were important." He felt something lurch in his chest again. A strange mix of guilt, confusion, and a deep ache he didn't know how to name. "Do you know her name?" he asked softly. "Elena. Elena." "Dawson," Maddie said. Caleb's stomach dropped. He'd known the name Dawson. He'd read it on a patient file almost a decade ago. A young woman, 21, single, stage 1 endometriosis, qualified for full financial sponsorship through Morgan Biotech's low-income fertility program. No red flags, no follow-up. He hadn't thought of her since. "Your mom? She came to my clinic?" Maddie nodded. "She said she wanted you to know, even if we were strangers, you were the only one who gave her a chance to have us." The words sat heavy between them. Caleb couldn't respond. His throat was too tight. He stood, walking stiffly toward the window, where the glass framed the forest beyond like a painting. Snow still fell, but slower now, gentler. The storm had softened, though his heart had not. His house, this house, had been built for peace, for silence, for keeping people at arm's length. And now it held a child in mismatched socks and a baby barely clinging to warmth. He turned around and looked at them. Maddie curled up in front of the fire, her cup cradled in both hands, eyes growing heavy. Scout beside her like a guardian statue. Benji finally sleeping. Caleb walked to the edge of the couch and sat on the floor with a pillow behind his back. He placed the crumpled photograph Maddie had given him on the coffee table and stared at it again. There she was, Elena. With the same gray-blue eyes as Maddie, the same shape of cheekbones. She looked tired, even in the photo, but happy. Her smile was uneven, uncertain, but real. He tried to remember if they'd ever spoken at the clinic, if he had ever looked her in the eye, or if she had just been one of hundreds of cases passed through intake, approved by assistants, and quietly filed away. The weight of that possibility pressed hard on his chest. He picked up the photo again and turned it over. In faded ink, barely legible beneath water stains, a few words were scribbled. "If anything ever happens, find Caleb Morgan. Please." He sank back against the couch, closing his eyes. "The company I built to create life. And this is where it leads. a child in my living room, crying for a mother I never met. Benji stirred, making a wet, rattling sound that pulled Caleb back to attention. He dropped the photo and rushed over. Maddie's eyes shot open. He does that when he's scared. Caleb leaned close, placing his ear near Benji's tiny mouth. The baby was breathing, but it wasn't right. There was a whistle in his chest, a tightness. Then Benji wheezed sharply, his face scrunching up. "He can't breathe when he cries," Maddie whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Please, mister, please help him." Caleb didn't think. He acted. He scooped Benji into his arms and grabbed the car keys from the bowl near the door. "Maddie," he said firmly, "put your shoes on. You're coming with me." Scout barked once, loud and clear, as if agreeing. Maddie scrambled to her feet. Caleb wrapped Benji in another blanket and held him close to his chest as he rushed out into the snow. The cold slapped him in the face, but this time it didn't matter. Nothing else did. Behind him, the photo sat on the table, curling at the edges under the heat of the fire. It had been a relic of a forgotten kindness, but now it was a thread pulling him into something real, into something that, for the first time in a long time, truly mattered. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and worry, sterile floors, flickering fluorescent lights, and the low hum of exhausted families waiting for miracles they couldn't afford. Caleb hadn't stepped into a place like this in over a decade. His life had been lived in clean glass towers, private hospitals, places where illness was sanitized and softened. But this place, it felt real. It felt desperate. He paced the hallway outside the examination room, phone in hand, though he wasn't calling anyone. Maddie sat on the molded plastic chair beside him, small legs swinging. Her shoes were still damp. Scout lay on the floor between them, head on his paws, eyes flicking toward every passing nurse. The leash looped loosely around Maddie's wrist. Benji had been taken back 20 minutes ago. A nurse in blue scrubs with graying hair and tired eyes had lifted him gently from Caleb's arms and whispered, "You did the right thing getting him here when you did." Caleb hadn't moved since. He stared at the overhead directory that pointed to pediatrics, radiology, billing. He hated how familiar the fonts were. His company had helped design the donor registry software used here years ago. His name might still be printed on the back of some corporate sponsorship plaque. It felt obscene. "Do you think they'll fix him?" Maddie asked quietly. Caleb turned toward her. Her voice was so soft, he almost missed it under the buzz of the overhead lights. "I think they're trying very hard," he said. She nodded, looking down at Scout. Her hand rubbed absent-mindedly behind his ear. Caleb noticed a tiny crack in her thumbnail, dried blood at the cuticle. The kind of thing you didn't notice until you realized how long it had been since someone checked. A nurse stepped out. "Mr. Morgan?" He was at the door before she finished the word. "Your son, the baby, is stable. Mild pneumonia, dehydration, low-grade fever. He'll need rest, antibiotics, and warmth. But you got him here just in time." Caleb exhaled so hard his shoulders dropped. "He's not my son," he said automatically. The nurse gave him a look. Not judgment. Something closer to disappointment. "Well," she said, "he's acting like you are." She returned to her rounds. Maddie stood beside him now, hugging Scout's leash like a lifeline. Caleb looked down at her. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were glossy. He reached out, hesitated, then gently rested a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Not this time. They walked through the halls of the clinic in silence. Children cried in nearby rooms. Somewhere, a baby wailed. A television in the corner played an old cartoon, volume too low to understand. The scent of bleach clashed with stale vending machine coffee. Caleb had never realized how noisy poverty could be. They stepped outside into the crisp afternoon light. Snow still blanketed the ground, but the storm had passed. The clouds were thinning. He opened the car door for Maddie, helping her into the back seat with Scout beside her. As he slid into the driver's seat, something tugged at him. "Maddie," he said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Where exactly were you two sleeping before I found you?" She pointed. "Back past the park, down near the alley behind the big yellow church." He paused. He knew the place. Not well, but enough. The neighborhood was run down. Years ago, the city had promised revitalization. Instead, it got another liquor store and a payday loan office. "Can we go there?" he asked gently. "Just for a minute." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I'll show you." 15 minutes later, they pulled onto a cracked side street. Chain-link fences drooped under the weight of snow. Graffiti clung to the brick. Caleb parked beside the alley entrance and stepped out, the cold biting into his throat again. Maddie led the way without hesitation. They passed a dumpster, a burnt mattress. Finally, they stopped beside a crooked cement wall painted with a fading mural of angel wings. And there, just beneath the shelter of a broken fire escape, sat the remnants of their shelter. A stroller snapped at the wheel, a damp pink blanket, a plastic bag with half a bottle of juice, and tucked beneath it all, an old, stained diaper bag. Caleb stepped closer, crouching. The wind whipped through the alley. It smelled like rot and runoff. He reached inside the bag, gently pushing aside a torn pacifier pouch and an unopened box of tissues. At the very bottom was something wrapped in a Ziploc bag, folded several times over. He pulled it out. Inside was a handwritten note. The paper was creased, frayed at the edges and damp, but the ink had held. Caleb unfolded it. "If they find you, protect them. Give them the life I couldn't. Please, Elena." He stared at the words, letting them settle into his chest like an anchor. All the years, all the clinics, all the contracts. He had built his company to help people create life. But this was the first time he'd ever felt its weight. His jaw clenched. He slid the letter into his coat pocket, rising slowly. Maddie was standing behind him, arms folded, eyes downcast. "This is where we waited," she said. "Mom said, she said if she didn't come back by the third night, I should take Benji and find you." Caleb's stomach turned. "She didn't come back?" Maddie shook her head. "She never came back." She didn't cry, and that somehow made it worse. He walked to her, bent down, and gently placed both hands on her shoulders. "I wish I'd found you sooner," he said. "You did now," she whispered. They stood in the alley a minute longer before Scout barked softly, pacing near the car, as if reminding them there was still a future to return to. As they drove back toward the hills, Maddie leaned her head against the window. Scout rested his chin on her lap. The sun was trying to break through, and in Caleb's coat pocket, the letter weighed heavier than any boardroom decision he had ever made. When they returned to the mansion, he helped Maddie out of the car, cradled Benji, who stirred faintly, and led them inside. He didn't turn on the music system. He didn't check his emails. He didn't answer the missed calls flashing on his phone. Instead, he placed the letter on the coffee table beside the photograph and stood still, breathing deep. The girl was right. He had been in the picture once. But now he was in it again. And this time, He wasn't stepping out of the frame. The house no longer echoed. It breathed. Softly at first, like something learning how. Where there was once only the dull hum of climate control and the occasional clink of glass, there was now life. Footsteps, muffled and small, the rustling of blankets, the rhythmic snuffling of a baby finally sleeping deeply in a warm crib. And in the center of it all, the gentle wheeze of a golden retriever, curled like a sentinel near the foot of the stairs. Caleb Morgan sat on the floor of the guest room turned nursery, one knee up, elbow resting, watching Benji sleep. He'd assembled the crib himself that afternoon, with hands more accustomed to signing contracts than reading instruction manuals. Maddie had helped, or rather, she had handed him screws and cheered when he didn't curse. It was strange, this feeling in his chest. Not pride exactly, something quieter, something warmer. Upstairs, the room next to his, once a yoga studio, briefly a second office, was now Maddie's. She had chosen it herself after Caleb offered the option, eyes scanning the hallway with cautious curiosity until she pointed. That one. He had nodded, even though it had the worst natural light and the smallest closet. She didn't seem to care about that. It was the one closest to his. That night, as snow drifted gently outside, Caleb found himself hovering in her doorway. She was in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, Scout asleep on the rug like a rug himself. A nightlight cast a faint glow across the room, star-shaped, flickering softly on the walls and ceiling like tiny constellations. He cleared his throat. "Want a story?" he asked, feeling instantly ridiculous. Maddie looked up at him, unsure. "You know any?" "Maybe one." He walked in slowly, holding an old hardcover he'd found buried in a box near the fireplace. The Snowy Day. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and age. He sat on the edge of the bed, awkwardly balancing the book on his knee, and began to read. His voice, usually clipped and businesslike, felt foreign in the softness of this space. But he pushed through, stumbling only twice. Once on a word he couldn't pronounce, and once when Maddie shifted slightly closer, resting her hand on Scout's back. By the end of the story, her eyes were beginning to droop. He reached for the book, closing it quietly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice like tissue paper. He stood, moved toward the light switch, but before he could turn it off, she spoke again. "Can I leave it on?" "The nightlight?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't like all the way dark." "I'll leave it on," he said. "I don't like it either." She smiled faintly, and for the first time it didn't feel like it hurt her to do so. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "Good night, Maddie." She whispered something so quiet he almost missed it. "Good night, Mr. Caleb." The next morning, she found the nightlight replaced, a new one shaped like a moon and stars. It projected soft galaxies on the ceiling. She didn't say anything about it, but she plugged it in. Later that afternoon, as Caleb reviewed email on his tablet, a conference call from Tokyo scheduled in blinking red, Maddie let out a cry from upstairs. He dropped the device instantly. He found her tangled in bedsheets, tears streaking down her cheeks, sobbing softly. Scout stood at the foot of the bed, unsure whether to bark or lick. Caleb didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, awkwardly at first, then firmly. Her face pressed into his chest, breath catching. He rocked her gently, whispering nothing in particular. When she calmed, she didn't let go. The tablet buzzed and went silent. He didn't look at it again. That evening, June Whitman arrived, dusting snow from her coat, cheeks pink from the cold. She was a retired social worker, longtime friend of Caleb's late father, and someone who always brought the smell of peppermint wherever she went. Caleb met her at the door with a look that said, "I need help," even before the words came. Inside, over coffee, she listened. He told her everything, what Maddie had said, the letter from Elena, the photo, the note in the diaper bag, and Benji's condition. He showed her the letter, his voice tight. June read it in silence, then folded it and handed it back. "She trusted you," she said. "She didn't even know me." She knew enough. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Darren Cole, the father. He's still out there. He was in Elena's records. She tried to block him. The paperwork disappeared." June's face hardened. Wouldn't be the first time someone with a clean suit and a dirty heart slipped through the cracks. "You want me to dig?" "I need more than a background check," Caleb said. "I need to know what I'm up against." June nodded once. "I'll get you what I can, but if Child Services steps in before we're ready, they'll take them," Caleb finished. "And Darren could get custody by default." Caleb clenched his jaw. "I won't let that happen." June sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. "You're changing." He didn't argue. He didn't know how to. When she left, she paused at the front door and turned. "I've seen a lot of cases, Caleb. Some people show up because they have to. Others show up because they choose to. I think you already made your choice." That night, Caleb sat back in Benji's room, watching the baby sleep. The tiny chest rising and falling, the soft wheeze replaced by a rhythmic breath. In the doorway, Maddie stood holding a folded piece of paper. She walked to him and handed it over. He unfolded it. A drawing with shaky letters. "Us. If we were a family." He stared at it, eyes burning. "I messed up the feet," Maddie said, fidgeting. "No," he whispered, voice cracking. "It's perfect." She smiled, turning back toward her room. Scout followed like a shadow. Caleb sat still, holding the drawing in his hands, his thumb brushing over the heart. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, for the first time, the house was beginning to feel less like a museum and more like a home. Sunlight pooled gently across the living room floor, stretching through the wide windows like a golden invitation. The frost outside had begun to retreat, leaving thin rivulets of water trickling down the panes. Inside Caleb Morgan's home, life no longer whispered. It laughed. It squeaked. It scattered glitter on the furniture. The glass coffee table, once the centerpiece of a minimalist showplace, now wore a rainbow crown of coloring books, juice boxes, and a half-assembled puzzle of a barnyard scene. Cartoon jingles chirped softly from the mounted television in the corner, a background hum to the shifting rhythm of his days. Scout snoozed in the hallway, his belly rising and falling beneath a makeshift blanket Fort Maddie had constructed out of dining chairs and throw pillows. It leaned to one side and glowed faintly from the battery-powered fairy lights Caleb had ordered in a moment of indulgence, and now couldn't imagine the house without. The mansion had stopped feeling like a sanctuary for silence. Now it was full of proof that someone was here, someone who needed it. Caleb stood at the kitchen counter stirring applesauce into Benji's oatmeal while the baby kicked in his high chair, babbling at a plush octopus toy. Maddie sat at the island, still in her pajamas, focused on drawing what she insisted was a family portrait for the fridge. She gave Caleb spiky brown hair, a tie, and a very wide smile. Scout was drawn with comically long legs and a tail that curved like a question mark. Caleb smiled as he watched her. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from June. "Call me, it's about Darren." He glanced at the kids, then stepped into the hallway, lowering his voice. "June, I got into the sealed county archive this morning," she said. "Had to call in a favor with a clerk I used to mentor. Elena did everything right. She filed an emergency petition to block Darren's guardianship if anything happened to her." "Then why wasn't it on record?" Caleb asked, heart tightening. June sighed. "Because someone never filed it. Whether that was incompetence or deliberate, well, I'll let you guess. But on paper, Darren still has a claim." Caleb's jaw locked. "She trusted the system, and it erased her." "She trusted you too," June reminded him gently. "Now the clock's ticking." He looked toward the living room where Maddie was giggling as Benji dropped oatmeal on his socks. "I'm not letting him near them." June's voice softened. "Then you'll need a plan. Fast." Caleb ended the call, shoved the phone in his pocket, and walked back toward the kitchen. Maddie looked up at him with a smile. "Can I show you something?" He nodded. She held up the picture. It was bright and messy and beautiful. 3 figures stood beneath a huge yellow sun. Caleb in the middle, holding Benji in one arm and Maddie's hand in the other. Scout sat at their feet with a speech bubble that read, "Woof!" In the corner, she'd drawn a house. Their house. Underneath, in large purple letters, "Real Family." Caleb felt something in his chest give. Then Maddie tilted her head. "Can I ask you something now?" He braced, sensing the shift in her tone. "Of course." "Were you sad?" she asked slowly. "When you found out you couldn't have a baby?" The question hit him like a whisper wrapped around a blade. He sat down beside her, hands resting flat on the table. "I was," he admitted. "But sad wasn't even the word. It was emptiness. Like there was this space inside me that nothing else could fill. Not work, not money, not success." Maddie didn't blink. She just listened. "And now?" she asked. He smiled, soft and sincere. "Now I think that space wasn't meant to be filled by what I thought it was." She looked down, biting her lip. "You mean us?" He reached out and tapped the drawing. "I mean exactly that." She smiled, then leaned over and added one more detail. "A small flower growing from the front yard." "That's from Mommy's garden," she said. That night, as twilight soaked into the snowy trees, Caleb tucked Benji into his crib, gently humming a tune he barely remembered hearing from Maddie's room. It wasn't a real song, at least not one he'd ever known. Just a gentle, meandering melody. Maddie had hummed it that afternoon while coloring. Something her mother used to sing, she'd said. Now it lingered in the air, even in silence. He paused outside Maddie's door before stepping inside. She was lying on her side, eyes already closed, Scout curled up behind her like a bodyguard. Caleb pulled the blanket up over her shoulder, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. She stirred, but didn't wake. He sat in the chair by her bed and watched the projection of stars move slowly across the ceiling. The lullaby echoed again in his head, like a memory passed through blood. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or himself. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and soft, almost gentle. Then came the knock. Not loud, but firm. Caleb rose, muscles tensing, and crossed to the security panel beside the staircase. The camera feed blinked on. A black SUV idled in the driveway, its windows tinted. A man stepped out, straightening the lapels of a crisp gray overcoat. Darren Cole. He stood with practiced ease, smiling faintly at the camera, holding a folded document in one hand. Caleb's breath left him in a slow, cold exhale. He turned, walked down the stairs, and opened the door. They stared at each other for a long moment. Darren's smile widened. "Well, you're not what I expected." Caleb didn't speak. "I'm here for Maddie and the boy," Darren said, holding up the paper. "Emergency order for temporary custody. Judge signed it yesterday." Caleb didn't reach for it. He didn't move. "They're not yours," Darren said, voice tightening. "And you've had your fun. But I'm their blood. And legally, you're a shadow she ran from." Caleb interrupted, voice like steel. "You'll never touch them again." Darren's jaw twitched. "I'm not the enemy, Mr. Morgan. You're not a father either." He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "And I promise you, if you even breathe wrong in their direction, I'll make sure you regret it." Darren smirked. "We'll see what the court says." He turned and walked back to the SUV. Caleb watched the taillights disappear down the winding road, heart pounding, fists clenched. When he shut the door, Scout was already sitting at the bottom of the stairs. And Maddie stood halfway up, eyes wide. She held onto the banister with one hand, in the other her blanket. "Was that him?" she whispered. Caleb stepped forward. It was. Her chin trembled. "Is he going to take us?" He knelt down, looked her straight in the eyes. "No," he said. "He's not." She stared at him for a long beat, then nodded and stepped down into his arms. He held her for what felt like forever, the hush of snowfall pressing against the windows. The ghosts had come knocking, but this time they weren't getting in. The courthouse in downtown Brenton wasn't grand. It wasn't the kind of place where landmark cases made headlines or camera crews lined the steps. But that morning, under a pewter sky and the bitter nip of late winter wind, it might as well have been the center of the universe. Caleb stood in the hallway outside courtroom 2B, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that fit his frame perfectly, but felt like armor from another life. It was tailored for corporate warfare, not custody hearings. His reflection in the narrow window showed someone composed, but his hands betrayed him. Clenched fists at his sides, fingertips white. Maddie sat beside him on the wooden bench, dressed in a navy coat June had hand-sewn to fit. Her sketchbook was clutched tight against her chest, like a shield. Her boots dangled above the floor, not quite touching, and her face was pinched in that too-old way he'd grown to recognize. Like a child trying not to show she was afraid. Scout lay at her feet, leash wrapped gently around her wrist. Caleb had fought to let the dog come in. The judge had allowed it, conditionally, when Maddie said softly, "He makes it easier to talk." Darren stood at the end of the hall with his lawyer, Trent Lowell, a local shark in a slim coat and shiny shoes. Darren's expression was calm, confident. He met Caleb's gaze and smirked, then leaned into his attorney's ear and said something that made the lawyer chuckle. It turned Caleb's stomach. Harper Lane arrived at 8:59 on the dot, clipboard under one arm, coffee in the other. Her lipstick was a deep maroon, and her stare could chip glass. "We ready?" she asked without looking up. "No," Caleb admitted. She smiled faintly. "Good. That means you care." The courtroom was modest. No gallery, no jury box. Just rows of benches and a raised platform where Judge Angela Monroe sat with a small American flag behind her. Early 50s, sharp cheekbones, graying hair pulled into a bun. No nonsense in the best way. The session began with procedural formalities. Names, roles, guardian petitions, documents filed and countered. Then Darren's attorney took the floor. "My client," Lowell began smoothly, "has a legal and biological connection to the minors in question. He was Elena Dawson's partner. While there may have been disagreements in their past, Mr. Cole has stepped forward to provide stability in the wake of a tragic loss. He owns a home, has a flexible work schedule, and has expressed sincere interest in raising the children in a safe, loving environment. Caleb's jaw tightened. Safe had never felt like such an ugly word. Lowell gestured toward Caleb. Mr. Morgan, on the other hand, is a high-profile CEO with no parenting history, no legal guardianship, and an emotional connection rooted in guilt and sentimentality. While commendable, these are not sufficient grounds for custody. Harper stood, calm as ever. We have submitted a medical report detailing signs of malnourishment, respiratory illness, and bruising on the infant when he was found. Additionally, we have a letter from Elena Dawson, signed and verified, indicating her intent to leave her children in the care of Caleb Morgan should anything happen to her. She turned toward the bench. Your Honor, this is not a question of convenience or emotion. It's a question of safety. The judge looked at Maddie. Would the child be comfortable speaking? Caleb looked down at her. She squeezed Scout's leash and gave the tiniest nod. She rose from the bench and walked slowly to the witness table, sketchbook still in hand. The courtroom seemed to shrink around her. What's your name, sweetie? The judge asked kindly. Maddie, she said. Do you know why you're here? She nodded. Do you want to live with Mr. Cole? Maddie didn't answer immediately. She looked at Caleb, then opened her sketchbook. She held up a drawing. 3 stick figures again, her, Benji, and Caleb, standing under a banner that said, Home. She placed it gently on the table. He says I'm a burden, she whispered. Said I talk too much. That Mom was weak. He locked me in the laundry room once because I cried when Benji was sick. Judge Monroe's eyes narrowed. Did your mom ever say who you should live with if she couldn't be there? She said, find the man from the picture, the one who helped make me. She said he'd know what to do. Harper stepped forward. Your Honor, we also have an audio file to submit, retrieved from Elena Dawson's personal phone. June had recovered the voicemail from Elena's old phone, unlocked with a 4-digit passcode Maddie had remembered through tears. The judge nodded. Play it. The room filled with static. Then came the voice, Elena's voice, worn, weak, but unmistakably real. If you're hearing this, Caleb, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you everything sooner, but I was scared. I didn't want to burden you, but they're all I have. If Maddie finds you, please don't let her grow up thinking she was a mistake. Silence fell like snow. Caleb looked down. His fists had opened. His eyes stung. Darren shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. Judge Monroe looked at him. Do you have anything to say in response, Mr. Cole? Darren stood, straightened his jacket, and shrugged. Emotions run high in grief, he said. But I've never hurt those kids. They were never in danger. I was just trying to give them space until I figured things out. By locking them in a laundry room? The judge asked sharply. Darren's smile faltered. I've made mistakes, he admitted. Judge Monroe's voice was firm. Children don't get do-overs. Adults do, and they have consequences. She took a long pause, scanning the files before her. Given the medical evidence, the statements from the minor, and the confirmed intent of the biological mother, this court finds sufficient reason to remove Darren Cole from consideration for custody. Darren's face twisted. Furthermore, she continued, Caleb Morgan is hereby granted full provisional guardianship of Madeline and Benjamin Dawson, with recommendation for expedited adoption proceedings pending home review. Harper exhaled slowly. Caleb gripped the edge of the bench. But none of that mattered, because Maddie had turned and was running toward him. He met her halfway, dropping to his knees as she threw her arms around his neck. He held her tight, like she was the one keeping him from falling apart. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Caleb closed his eyes. "So did you." Outside, as they stepped into the weak morning sun, Scout bounced ahead, tail wagging. Benji cooed in June's arms, cheeks rosy. Caleb paused on the steps, hand on Maddie's shoulder. "We're going home," he said quietly. She looked up at him with a smile that finally reached her eyes. "Yes," she said. "We are." Spring came slowly to Vermont, reluctant and quiet, like a guest unsure whether it had truly been invited. The snow melted in patches, first from the driveway, then the rooftops, and finally the garden beds. Green returned cautiously, like it didn't want to startle anyone. But inside Caleb Morgan's home, life was already in full bloom. Benji was learning to walk, or more accurately, learning to wobble and crash with triumphant squeals. He shuffled across the living room rug like a pint-sized bulldozer, chubby hands gripping the edge of the leather ottoman for balance. Every stumble earned an enthusiastic round of applause from Maddie, who crowned him Baby Thunderfeet and declared him king of the couch fort. The once immaculate house had given up its pretense of perfection. The glass coffee table bore the faint outline of juice cup rings. The hallway had become a gallery of taped-up crayon masterpieces. A plastic bin in the entryway overflowed with tiny shoes, baby socks, and a leash that now belonged exclusively to Scout, though Maddie insisted he had to earn it every day. Caleb's days followed a new rhythm. He no longer woke to silence. He woke to the sound of feet padding across the hardwood, Benji's babble, the clink of cereal in a bowl, and Maddie narrating her dream to Scout like he was a therapist. One chilly morning, Caleb stood in the kitchen trying and failing to braid Maddie's hair before school. He had a YouTube tutorial paused on his phone, a hairbrush in one hand, and a pink elastic band clenched between his teeth. The first attempt looked like a lopsided pretzel. "Perfect," Maddie said, admiring herself in the toaster's reflection. "Don't fix it." He raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Really," she said, grinning. "It's special because you did it." Caleb smiled, realizing he had never felt more accomplished in his life. That afternoon, he surprised Maddie with a drive. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice curious but calm, Benji snoozing in his car seat behind them. "Somewhere important," he said. They pulled into the small cemetery nestled just beyond the edge of town. A light breeze carried the scent of damp earth and pine. The air was cool, but the sun had finally broken through the clouds in scattered beams. Maddie stepped out without asking questions. She held Caleb's hand in one and a folded drawing in the other. Scout trotted beside them, leash slack, head low. They stopped in front of a modest headstone, the name etched in soft granite, Elina Dawson. Beneath it, a simple phrase, "Loving mother, brave soul." Maddie knelt in the grass and placed the drawing at the base of the marker. It showed the same stick figure family as before, but this time Elena stood just behind them, her arms outstretched like wings. "I added Mommy," she said quietly, "so she knows she's still part of us." Caleb swallowed hard, kneeling beside her. "You were right to send them," he whispered toward the stone. "They're safe now." Maddie turned toward him. "We came back, Mommy," she said, "and we're okay now." Scout lay down beside them, head resting on Caleb's shoe, tail still. They sat there for a while, just breathing, until Benji stirred in the car seat, and Maddie said softly, "He doesn't like when it's too quiet." Caleb smiled. "Neither do I." Back home, the living room buzzed with warmth. June stopped by in the early evening with a basket of banana muffins and the final paperwork for the Elena Hope Project, an initiative Caleb had launched in Elena's name. The foundation would offer emergency legal assistance and housing to vulnerable single parents and children in the foster system. June, practical as ever, handed him a clipboard. "Press conference is next week. You're officially a philanthropist now." Caleb chuckled. "Let's not call it that." Maddie, standing nearby with a mouthful of muffins, said, "Can we call it a superhero thing instead?" June winked. "Even better." That night, as the moonlight spilled across the windows and the kids finally settled into bed, Caleb stepped into Maddie's room. She was flipping through her sketchbook, humming under her breath. He paused in the doorway, arms folded. "What are you working on?" She looked up, grinning, and held out a fresh page. It showed a big yellow house, a tree with a tire swing, and 3 people standing hand in hand. Caleb wore a suit with his tie askew. Maddie had sparkles in her hair. Benji, somehow, was flying. Above them, in careful looping letters, "Us, real now." Caleb stared at it, his throat tightening. "You really think so?" She nodded. "We're already here." He walked over, knelt beside her bed, and touched the edge of the paper. "Can I keep this one?" he asked. "It's for the fridge," she said, "like important stuff goes." He kissed the top of her head and tucked the covers up beneath her chin. After she drifted off, Caleb stood in the hallway for a while, watching the night settle in. The house didn't just hold warmth now, it held meaning. In the kitchen, the fridge already had a magnet waiting, and on the coffee table lay one final envelope, his court-certified approval for adoption. Maddie Grace Morgan. Official, binding, undeniable. He didn't open it just yet. Instead, he stood at the window and watched the spring moon rise over the trees. Scout lay at his feet. Somewhere upstairs, Benji stirred and fell back asleep with a sigh. And somewhere, just beyond the wind, Caleb could still hear Elena's voice. Don't let her grow up thinking she was a mistake. He wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. The Morgan house no longer resembled the sleek, soulless sanctuary it once was. Color had taken over. Bright drawings taped on the fridge, rain boots parked by the door, a basket of mismatched socks that no one ever quite got around to sorting. Laughter echoed freely now, not politely, but loudly and often. It was the kind of laughter that rose from the belly, passed through the heart, and left traces in every room it touched. On a mild Saturday afternoon, the backyard came alive with the first community gathering of the Elena Hope Project. Folding chairs dotted the lawn. Streamers fluttered from the porch beams. A long wooden table stood beneath the trees, covered in cupcakes, lemonade pitchers, and a donation box painted in purple glitter. The sign beside it read, "For families finding their way." Maddie stood proudly behind the cupcake table, handing each visitor their treat with practiced seriousness. "Chocolates for bravery," she told one volunteer. "Vanilla is for new beginnings. Strawberries just strawberry." Laughter rippled from the line. Scout sat at her feet, wearing a small navy bow tie clipped to his collar. Maddie had insisted he look fancy, but not ridiculous. Benji, in his stroller, babbled happily with sticky fingers and a half-eaten muffin. Caleb watched from the porch, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile tugging at his mouth. He'd helped plan events before, corporate galas, ribbon cuttings, keynote fundraisers. But this? This was something else. This was the kind of legacy you couldn't measure in net worth or column inches. June arrived carrying a small packet of seeds and a hand-painted wooden sign. "Thought we'd make good on that garden," she said, setting it gently into Caleb's hands. The sign read, "Mom's Garden," the letters surrounded by tiny painted wildflowers. Maddie took the packet eagerly, dirt already under her fingernails. Caleb helped her find a soft patch of earth beneath the kitchen window. She knelt and pressed each seed carefully into the soil. Scout lay nearby, head on his paws, watching like a sentry. "I told Mommy I'd grow something," Maddie said, voice steady. "And now I am." Caleb knelt beside her, hand over hers. She'd be proud. That evening, after the last guest had gone and the lanterns were dimmed, Caleb sat in the nursery with Benji asleep in his arms. The boy's breath was slow and even, mouth slightly open, his small hand curled against Caleb's chest. Outside the window, a rare late spring flurry had begun to fall, not in force, not as a storm, but gently, soft as ash, more memory than winter. Caleb rocked slowly, back and forth, the chair creaking beneath him. He looked out into the dark, where petals from the blooming dogwood trees fluttered like pale confetti in the porch light. The air smelled faintly of fresh soil and lilacs, and there, in that hush between day and night, he began to hum. The lullaby Maddie had sung months ago, the one she hummed in her sleep, the one Elena's voice had carried across static and voicemail and memory, filled the room in low, tender notes. It wasn't perfect. He sang it off-key, half under his breath, but it was whole. Maddie appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, her oversized pajama shirt hanging off one shoulder. "You're humming it," she said softly. He nodded, still swaying. "I thought only girls sang lullabies." "I used to think that too," Caleb said. "Turns out anyone can sing if they love someone enough." She walked in slowly, climbed onto the edge of the chair, and rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think Mommy still loves us?" she whispered, voice as fragile as it had been in the snow that morning so long ago. Caleb turned to look at her, eyes shining in the low light. She never stopped. She blinked once, slowly, then let out a small, content sigh. "You know what I think?" "What's that?" "I think she sent us to save you too." Caleb swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Maybe she did. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, as he stood to carry her back to bed, she pressed her cheek against his chest and murmured, "You heard me, even when I whispered." He paused, kissed her forehead. "I always will." Later, after she was tucked in and Benji snored gently in the next room, Caleb passed through the kitchen. The counters were clean now, except for one thing, a new drawing taped carefully to the fridge. 4 stick figures. Caleb, Maddie, Benji, Scout. Above them, in Maddie's bright, looping letters, "Where someday happens." He stood there in the hush of the night, looking at it. His reflection shimmered faintly on the stainless steel, but this time, it didn't look lonely. This time, it looked like home. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to stay with us. Because here at Restoring Tales, every story reminds us that love, kindness, and second chances still exist. There are more tales waiting, of resilience, of hope, and of quiet heroes among us. So if you believe in the healing power of love and the beauty of life's small moments, be sure to subscribe to Restoring Tales and turn on notifications. Because the next story might be the one your heart's been waiting for. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.